my favorite nature nerds. It's great to be back with everyone for our 20th episode of our Lunch and Learn series. We skipped a month, so we were extra happy to have you here today. We began these webinars to create a space for us to come together and look at how different industry professionals are using technology to streamline problematic compliance tasks. Last January, we began to also explore the institutional changes that need to evolve in order to really put environmental technology to use and realize its full potential. I gotta say, the more I get into this game, the more I see institutional changes are really what's needed. We are here today with Jesse Norris and Phoebe Higgins of the Environmental Policy Innovation Center, known as EPIC. Great name, EPIC. Phoebe has graciously stepped in for EPIC's Executive Director, Tim Mail, who is not able to be here today. So thank you, Phoebe, appreciate that. EPIC is on a mission to build policies that deliver spectacular improvements in the speed and scale of environmental progress. I love that. This is so good. One of their strategies for doing that is to look for opportunities to expand conservation data technology, which of course we think is great. Their work on researching how data can help us advance environmental markets through better use of metrics and measurement. They support policies that incorporate data technology to keep practices cheaper and more streamlined. We'll be talking about that effort today, about restoration markets, the impact of an infrastructure bill, and about EPIC's digital service for the planet initiative. So WildNote's mission is to help protect our treasured natural resources by automating the process of environmental compliance. We see that happening when there is a free flow of information between regulators, permittees, and environmental consultants working toward a more healthy environment. So this is so aligned. Our mission and our vision is so aligned with what EPIC is doing, and we're really so appreciative of the work you're doing and to have you here today. And EPIC is sponsoring a water data prize to better communicate when water is safe to drink and what to do when it's not. We hope that you will ask questions, receive value, and walk away with real solutions to real problems. I'm the host, Kristen Hazard, founder and CEO of WildNote. And speaking of WildNote and our automation platform that is for both consultants, permittees, and regulators, we are thrilled to announce the appointment of Dr. Mark Sudal, former U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Regulatory Chief, to our advisory board. Dr. Sudal brings a distinguished level of expertise to WildNote and will play an essential role in expanding our partnerships with forward-thinking and industry-leading environmental consulting firms, as well as environmental regulatory bodies. Today, I'm joined with Rini Bunzi, one of our co-founders who is currently holding down sales for WildNote. If you'd like to learn more about WildNote, please contact her through the chat or email her at rini@wildnoteapp.com. And if anybody out there is doing restoration, I am so stoked. We are releasing a restoration success criteria export that we think will save you weeks in creating. It's one of the best things we've ever created. So if you're doing restoration, please contact Rini. Quick housekeeping, please use the chat window to interact and post questions for the panel. Please use the Q&A window for technical questions or if you need help during the webinar. And if you've not completed it yet, oh, have I even started the poll? Let's see here.
We started the recording.
There we go. Now the poll is launched. Please answer the poll questions. Okay, that was a long intro. Hope that was okay. Now we get to the good part. Our guests, Jesse and Phoebe. Jesse Norris is a senior analyst, water and technology policy at EPIC. Prior to joining EPIC, Jesse led business development and strategy for Upstream Tech, which is where we met her, a technology startup that uses satellite imagery to monitor and evaluate natural resources. If you are a Lunch and Learn regular, you will remember Jessie as one of our guest experts in a previous episode. She has also worked on programs related to regional planning for wetland restoration and urban climate change resilience for the Massachusetts Division of Ecological Restoration and Stantec. She holds a Master's of Science in Water Resources Engineering and Environmental Policy from Tufts University and a Bachelor of Arts in Geography from the University of Texas. She has worked on payment for ecosystem services programs in Costa Rica and Colombia, water access and sanitation in Palestinian refugee camps. Wow. And monitoring watershed health through satellites across the world. Welcome, Jesse. All right. And next we have Phoebe Higgins, Director of Markets at Epic. Prior to becoming the Director of Markets at Epic, Phoebe put her green MBA to work as a senior manager and fisheries finance expert at Environmental Defense Fund's Fishery Solutions Center. While there, she worked to drive impact investors and financial institutions to finance sustainable fisheries management for ocean protection, more sustainable seafood, and prosperous fishing communities. She served as the sustainable finance liaison to regional staff in places like Mexico, Chile, the Philippines, and South Pacific Islands, helping with strategy and sharing lessons between regions. Her time with EDF also included 6 years as the director of California Fisheries Fund, overseeing all operations, underwriting, portfolio management, and hiring of loan officers. She took the fund from its launch of 4.8 million in new loans to dozens of sustainable fisheries businesses. Phoebe speaks 4 languages and knows how to make 20 different kinds of pasta by hand. Yeah.
Love that.
Over, Phoebe. Awesome. Okay. So welcome, you two. Thank you so much for joining us. And we'd love to start out with the stories from the field. You got something, Phoebe?
I do. Yeah. When I was at California Fisheries Fund, which you mentioned was then, I was basically I made loans to commercial fishermen in California, and there was a new fisheries management program in place that gave all fishermen in the groundfish trawl sector individual fishing quota. So what that means is that all these fishermen were held 100% accountable for every pound of fish that they caught. And so this was kind of a new thing, but it was very impressive, the level of accountability that they were being held to. But something that was really challenging for them is that there were certain species they were not supposed to catch. They still got a little bit of quota because it was known that they would end up catching some of these fish, right. Usually, like over what they called overfished species. And if they caught them, they could throw them back if they didn't have a way to sell them, but they still counted against their quota. So it was a really big deal if these fishermen caught certain species. And one day this fisherman is talking to his cousin about the new regulations, and he's like, yeah, I can't even tell that I have some of these fish in the net until they get up on the deck of the boat, and then it's too late because then there's a human observer on the boat. There might be cameras. They used different monitoring technology, but mostly they had to have humans on board observing them. So it was a big deal. And the cousin was like, so really you can't see what's happening in the net? Like you get these fish on the deck and then you're in trouble if you have the wrong kind of fish in the net. And he's like, yeah, I can't see down into the net. And the cousin's like, well, I'm a software guy and I've worked on facial recognition technology and cameras. And I think we should build a camera that has a real-time feed so you can see what's in there. And we might even be able to like mark if they're the wrong kind of fish because I can do that recognition technology and stuff. So it was just a really cool idea.
Yeah.
That, someone who really didn't know anything about fishing was able to say, like, I think there's a technology solution here.
Yeah.
And it was just so cool because I think the managers had never really thought about, well, what if you could see before the net gets onto the boat? Like, what if you could see down in there in real time? So
yeah. It's called facial recognition.
Oh, good one.
Yeah, good one.
Awesome.
Exactly.
Okay, next segment, problem solved. So we're going to get into the problems Epic is trying to solve, and we'll start with Jesse. Can you tell our audience a little bit about the Digital Service for the Planet initiative and what it is and why you're doing it?
Yeah, happy to. So one of the biggest things that I recognized my time in technology was that we could have the best tools in the world, but if there are federal or regulatory barriers to that being used, like it's just not going to go anywhere. It's not going to have the same level of impact and scale and adoption that you might want to see. And so what we're doing with the Digital Service of the Planet is really an effort to say, how can we fundamentally rethink how the government builds, manages, and partners with technology and supports environmental conservation? And what that's built upon is something called the US Digital Service. And that was built by the Obama administration. It sits within the White House, so they have a lot of authority in saying, what can be done. And it primarily has only served healthcare.gov was its first big initiative, and then Veterans Affairs and like hiring and job boards. And we're saying, okay, well, this is a team that is ready to work in thinking about where are the programs that could utilize technology. And we're just thinking about, okay, how do you adapt that for the environmental space, or how do you adapt that for restoration or conservation goals? So that's the initiative in a nutshell, and I'm sure we can go into it more.
Yeah. So basically taking this service that was really effective with other departments in the government and using that same model to increase the technology adoption and effectiveness of these environmental agencies.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's great. So what are the ways in which technology can help speed the conservation process?
Yeah, I like to think about it in kind of three parts. I think one is more efficiently siting and screening conservation and restoration projects. So how can we better design it up front to either minimize the environmental impact or maximize the benefits? The second is, okay, I might have a ton of projects, but how do I make quick decisions of knowing which is the best use of my resources or might have the best impact? So that like decision-making, scenario planning toolkit. And then the third is monitoring, which is really often left out. You're like, I did it, I'm done. I have no budget to actually monitor that going forward. And so we see that as a really necessary step to both support the environmental markets that Phoebe works on, measuring success, and then thinking about the adaptive management. And I think the last piece that I'll say kind of underlying each of those, which is not necessarily speeding up conservation, but is bringing in community voices. So how do you bolster community engagement through the use of technology, through social media, through the like permitting common to process, and actually making that useful for the communities to engage and think about their priorities?
Yeah, technology by definition or just inherently brings standardization and also communication, right? Immediate communication can occur with technology. So let's see, Rainey, you're up.
Okay, so if we're talking about initiatives, what about incentives for the people doing the work, the developers, the restoration ecologists, the regulators? Like, they're in a certain rhythm already. What's the incentive to move them into being motivated to speed up these conservation processes?
I mean,
you want to take that, Phoebe?
Yeah. So, well, it's a couple things. Like we feel like there's proof that regulatory drivers matter. And if you create a regulatory driver for require, for instance, like offsetting of environmental impacts from new development, then you have a built-in market already. And that means that private sector players come into the picture and they want to deliver those offsets and mitigation restoration projects. So that's a big part of it. And then, I think the private sector side of it, the regulatory, or I mean the restoration firms and the project developers, they want everything streamlined because that helps their business model, their cash flow. That's what makes sense. And so they just want to see a really, like we were just talking about, a standardized approach, standardization and communication. I really liked that you said that, Kristen, because that's what makes it a lot easier for businesses to engage in some kind of an environmental project. So we need regulatory drivers that create that standardization and just make clear, like, how are we going to measure positive environmental outcomes? And another thing that we get really excited about is can the government start to move towards just saying, we want these measurable environmental outcomes and we'll buy them and we're going to put out an RFP and we just need people to deliver them, like miles of stream restored or this dam removal, reclamation of abandoned mine lands, all of that. Like if they just put that out there and they say, here's how we're going to measure success, and we just want those outcomes, then the private sector can come in and deliver them. And that's a much faster process than if you have government kind of saying, we need to do a design of a project and then bid it out and do a whole, manage all the contracting piece by piece. It's better if they just say, here's the outcomes we want, and if you deliver those, we'll pay you for them.
I see. And then so obviously the private sector, the developers and the ecologists are motivated because that's how they're going to get paid. And the regulators, agencies, their incentive would be more about like, well, also keeping things moving and also maybe simpler, more standardized, so their people don't. I've heard of piles of permits on desks, and that can't be a good thing to walk into in the morning.
I think,
Yeah.
I was going to say, we had a conversation with Mark Sudal, who y'all mentioned is now supporting WildNote's work, and he mentioned that any regulator might have anywhere from 40 to 60 permits on their desk at any given time that they're manually entering by hand into a database. And so you can think about their incentive is how can you save time, make that process electric, automate that process where it makes sense, and then you're facilitating, faster permits and kind of streamlining that process overall. So I think
maybe even doing it more accurately, right? Because
and doing
I
it
remember that same discussion with Mark, and he was saying it takes a while to get to the bottom of that paper, and by the time they get there, it might be the off season. So now they have to lose a whole year to go back and review that area again. So yeah, that would motivate me.
One of the things I learned building the success criteria export is that different regions of the Army Corps require different reporting. Different districts within the same region require different success criteria performance standards. And so I'm even imagining, even as a regulator, you're presented on 2 different projects with the data coming to you in different formats, in different ways. You just even still need time to like wrap your head around how they're presenting that data to you. So if we could standardize just that part, like maybe we can't standardize across the regions, the performance, but how they see the data presented to them, I think would also be a big increase in effectiveness and efficiency. And that's what we hope to do with like the WildNote output, basically, is the agencies say, this is great, let's just solidify on this. In terms of mission, do we see a federal agency that would be most amenable to technology?
Yeah. So what we do at Epic is we think about, who are the agencies or the people within those agencies that are more amenable or making progress. And one of the groups that we've seen a lot is NOAA is one of the biggest in terms of using satellite imagery. USGS is kind of, they have a lot of tools, but sometimes it's not that user friendly or that accessible. The Office of Science and Technology Policy is one of the more like obvious champions within the White House. And they are mostly staffed by people that come from outside of government and are saying, hey, here's some things that you can think about or do. And then the Office of Management and Budget is the one that's writing the presidential budget and reviewing all of the programs. So they are trying to go across silos and thinking about, the money that each of these agencies have. So a lot of agencies are listening to what the Office of Management and Budget says. And so we see a real opportunity with them to maybe champion an effort like this, recognizing the efficiencies that it would serve for all the programs and budget in general.
Yeah. Well, speaking of budget, there's this looming infrastructure spending bill. What do you see as implications of this? Like, hopefully it passes at the end of this month. I'm sure you've been thinking about it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, big picture, it has a few implications. One is that you have the environmental impacts that will come out of a bunch of spending on roads and transportation and all this infrastructure. Some of the more gray infrastructure type of pieces of that will create impacts that we need to offset and mitigate. Certainly avoid first as much as possible, then minimize, then mitigate. That's kind of the hierarchy that gets used. But the point there is we feel like we really need to build up more projects that mitigate those kinds of impacts so that they can quickly match, like be available the minute those projects go on the ground. So you're not waiting to mitigate. You don't first impact the wetlands and then wait a long time to like create your offset wetland mitigation bank. Instead, you keep building those credits, those habitat credits and species and wetland mitigation and stream credits by putting projects in the ground quickly. And then those are available to be offset credits for impacts. And this area of mitigation it's like not very sexy, but there's actually a lot of opportunity right now. There's a new advanced notice of proposed rule for how to do species mitigation for eagle impacts, which is a big area of consideration for wind farms, which are going to be, that's part of the bill. So talking about like renewables and all kinds of infrastructure, but also the bill is going to have some opportunities to build nature-based infrastructure to do climate resilience and shore up our coastal resilience infrastructure. So that's really exciting because it's the opportunity to spend money on nature-based solutions that can be used to design restoration and, of course, create some real resilience opportunities in the face of climate change. And the other area that Jesse's been working on a bit is around Justice 40, which is the president's objective of having 40% of funding that flows to environmental programs benefit historically underserved communities. And there's a real data need there, which I don't know if I could just pop it over to you, Jesse, to explain that, like how we can use data to influence decision making.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. It's linked to the infrastructure bill in part of saying, how do we make sure that the money is going to the places that actually need it the most? And one of the things that we've been helping advise on is, one, how do you define a disadvantaged community? What does that even look like? What are the programs that qualify under that? So nitty gritty into the policy and programs. But then lastly, where are the environmental injustices, and how do we think about that at a federal level? But then how do we make sure that the communities can also say, this is my problem in my area. There might not be data for it, but I live this every day. And I think that gets a little bit back to the role of the Digital Service Planet, which is it's all federal agencies, all thinking about climate and environmental goals. They have different databases that they're using to, qualify that, monitor it. And there needs to be some translation of that and standardization and streamlining across those agencies to make sure that that happens in the most effective way. And that's kind of the big gap that we're seeing, and an opportunity that could go really wrong if we don't get that right.
Yeah. Phoebe, I'd like to ask you a question about you were talking about getting these mitigation sites up and running so the credits are available for mitigation when these projects are shovel ready, right? So what do you think the biggest slowdown is? It finding the land and the ecosystems to create these banks? Is it getting the permitting? Is it actually the time it takes nature to, get turned into like a beautiful, healthy ecosystem? Like, where do you see the bottleneck there?
Well, I'm not the expert. Like, if you ask a restoration firm, you might get a different answer. But when I've talked to folks in that sector, they talk a lot about the slow permitting. It's 7 years, to permit a mitigation bank. And that's somewhere where we think technology could help. Like some of the standards that you were just talking about, how do you make it a lot faster? Because if you take every project and treat it as a one-off and just use tons of paper and not an online dashboard. There's all kinds of, and the Army Corps that's doing their permitting, they're supposed to do these things faster and faster. And there has been some guidance around that, but it doesn't seem to really, it doesn't mean that they have really, it seems, figured out how to do it faster. So that's a really big area for sure, because it's already made clear that like mitigation banks are a preference of the federal government. They want offsets to come from mitigation banks, which means you've got to build the banks somewhere. So permitting's a big one.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, just to connect the dots, I think you've laid it out, but I'll reiterate. So with increased construction coming up, then we're going to need increased mitigation and hopefully increased speedier permitting and approval. And maybe that, like Kristen was saying earlier, also leads to better communication. So I think the three are definitely connected.
Yeah, right. All right. So we're living in an age of big data and AI that allow business to make better decisions more quickly. But it seems that we don't have a clear focus on how to do this with environmental data. What can we do to move toward that end?
Yeah, so some of the work, Electric Power Research Institute, EPRI, they've done some really cool work in this area at trying to help their electric utilities do their environmental management and monitoring through technology and data. And we've helped them a little bit with that and just found that there's still kind of a disconnect between the parts of these companies that use technology and data a lot and the environmental side. That seems to happen. And there's a real need for just research, data sets, training, and opportunities to share information and knowledge among people who are going to be practitioners putting technology to use. And so, you know, honestly, your webinars are one of the only places where there's like this group discussion going on about environmental technology. There's not a whole lot of that. There's not this whole, you know, you don't have an annual conservation technology conference or whatever.
Right. Not yet.
So that's an area of need. Yeah. So we think there's a real need there. And then I saw one of the questions in the Q&A related to what I was also going to say is that kind of the old way of doing things does get in the way. I mean, people are just, they know how they want to do things, either at the level of a company that's trying to make use of technology or the regulators that are involved in something where there's a back and forth, like water quality testing, where you have an old way of, you always send the sample to the lab and then you get it back. Like, why aren't we doing continuous water quality testing through sensors? Well, there's all these reasons that EPA doesn't want to do that, and it becomes a lot of data, and then what do you do with that? And so you can go down a whole rabbit hole on things like that. But there's definitely, you know, people aren't ready for change in every part of their life, and that includes adoption of technology.
Yeah, that's true. And actually, that leads to a perfect question from Hannah Worthington. Have you experienced pushback from old school consultants and regulators?
Yeah, that's what the question I noticed come in. And I definitely, I think people are almost, well, there's pushback, there's the unknown. I mean, a lot of it is just kind of like fear of the unknown, what to do. Just in the fishing sector, I noticed like Jesse was saying, NOAA has done a lot to adopt technology, and NOAA manages fisheries through National Marine Fisheries Service, and they have been piloting all kinds of cool technology to monitor fishing. And just one of the basic problems is the space available to hold like thousands and thousands of hours of video footage.
Yeah.
And then to decide what is the appropriate, like if you're used to thinking that you have 100% monitoring on some activity, like they do in the fishery that I was talking about at the beginning, they have human observers on every trip, and they feel like so good about that. Like that's a human person, but there's still, we know there's human error, and ultimately someone can get sick and not show up, and then the fishermen can't even go fishing. So you want to have some kind of technology solution that can be an alternative. And they couldn't figure out, well, do we have to audit every hour of video footage to be as good as having a human on that boat? You know, those kinds of questions just keep going around.
Right. So we'll wrap up the questions here with what does EPIC ultimately hope to achieve with its work?
Well, we really want faster restoration and environmental outcomes, and we think that that's totally possible through streamlining things. Like what if you could do restoration, like I said, maybe it takes 7 years to permit a mitigation bank. What if you could do that in 6 months, you know? And we're talking about real change. So yeah, we want it to happen faster.
Yeah. Well, that leads us to the last segment, which is Kristen's crazy ideas, but we've got Phoebe here, so we've renamed it Phoebe's phenomenal ideas. And I think that relates actually. So what's a Phoebe phenomenal idea around this?
Yeah, I was kind of going there already. Like we have this vision for making restoration a much bigger part of the environmental equation. Like it's not just about protecting lands that haven't been impacted before, but we've got to restore the degraded landscapes in the US as well, and around the world too. We mainly focus on the US, and we can do it, but it just is happening way too slowly. So our ideas are all about how do you streamline that process and make it happen a lot faster, like permitting a mitigation bank in 2 months.
Yeah.
We just hope nature can keep up.
Yeah. I think Phoebe froze for me. Did she freeze?
Yeah, her voice was still coming through, and she has a very beautiful frozen face.
Yeah, it's a good frozen face. It's a good one. So that's good. here's another question. If you're wanting regulatory agencies to use new technology, is there a shared cost or trial period so that the agencies know what they're getting? Jesse?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. So there's two thoughts. One, we've been doing a lot of work around regulatory sandboxes, which I can send to the folks after this, which is basically the idea that what if we were to pause what our current regulations were and say, let's try it out if we were going to redesign this today rather than 1985.
Ooh.
And so it creates an intentional space for regulators and other stakeholders to test out that new technology, pilot what works, what doesn't work, and then think about revising the regulations to follow.
Yeah.
Another is that there are several opportunities for piloting. I did this a lot with different agencies in the past. But the other role that we see is, this is where the digital service of the planet comes in, right? Where I worked with USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, and they were really hesitant to use satellite imagery because they got burned in the past, right? They weren't the experts in satellite imagery. They weren't the experts in how they were going to use that. And they were really trusting an external consultant to do that for them. And it didn't work out. They're like really hesitant. I don't want to do this. I don't trust it. And I don't know, frankly, enough about technology to do that. And so that's the role that we see the digital service of the planet playing, where they are the technology experts. They know and work for the government to make sure that they have their best interest in mind, and then can help that planning, design, and procurement process for the technology that they're used to actually serve their missions and goals.
That's great. That's a great answer and really a great way. I love this regulatory sandbox idea. And then I love the idea of really getting the chance to rethink the actual regulations around this. Yeah. I mean, I see in the environmental consulting world, the sometimes quite onerous and maybe not protective measures that they've got to go through because it's in the permit, right? It's just there. So, Phoebe's back. Well, we're at 12:30, a little bit later. So hi, Phoebe, welcome back.
Hey, my internet went out in my office.
Of course, during a live webinar, right?
Yeah, sorry.
But thank you so much for both of you joining us today. Very enlightening and really appreciative of the work you're doing. I hope we continue to stay connected. And if anybody wants to contact Jesse or Phoebe, I've shared my screen with their emails. It's jesse@policyinnovation.org and phiggins@policyinnovation.org. So you can contact them. You can always contact us at wildnoteapp.com. And let's see, we've got, okay. So we've got our final Lunch and Learn for 2021, project retrospective and outlook for 2022. So this is cool. How are environmental consultants doing their 2022 planning, and how can technology help them implement that planning and be successful in what their goals are in 2022, as well as how did it go in 2021? So that's the topic of our next Lunch and Learn. Looking forward to that. And then we'll go into the what we call our off season of the Lunch and Learn. And if you have any ideas, some of our most popular Lunch and Learns have come from ideas from our from people listening. So please contact us. I really appreciate what Phoebe said, where we are actually hosting conversations that aren't happening elsewhere, and we want to keep doing that. So please, if you've got an idea, let us know, and we will make that a part of our next Lunch and Learns. And I think that's it then, everyone. Thank you again, and we will see you, let's see, November. Okay, bye everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
This is really great.